It's indeed a great pleasure again to see you all in the Advanced ART Masterclass series. Today we have a great academician with us, Dr. Sharayu Mohite, and she's going to actually, in continuation of our previous masterclass, which was dealt by Dr. Keshav Malhotra, where we discussed about the laboratory KPIs and understanding the performance metrics in an IVF lab and how it influences the outcomes. So in continuation with the lab, how do we align with our clinical outcomes? So there are a lot of things that we are going to talk about clinical KPIs and how we can integrate with our lab performance outcomes. And it is Sharayu's passion and Sachin sir's passion to always talk about KPIs. And I think she's going to do maximum justice to this topic. So before I really introduce the speaker, I just wanted to say a brief about our upcoming masterclass. So the next masterclass will be on 9th of April, which is going to be on Advanced Innovations in AI in Embryology by Dr. Chandan. Followed by, we are going back to basics of IUI, which is again very important. We would like all our patients to conceive in IUI before going on to ART by Dr. Paresh Patel, Precision Ovulation Induction, Optimizing Recombinant FSH and Low-Dose HCG Protocols in Non-IVF Setting. Then we have Dr. Shobhana Patel, who is going to talk about female fertility preservation. Next one, please. So it is indeed a great pleasure for me to announce our inaugural course, which is called as a Scale Campus course, which we are going to do on 25th of April, 2026. It is going to be a physical program in Chennai. The idea is to, master the core concepts. Our first Scale Campus course is going to be on optimizing fertilization, conventional IVF in the modern lab. So we are going to do end-to-end conventional IVF, including the insemination techniques, the protocols, everything. And it's going to be a limited number of 20 participants, and it is a paid course. It is going to be 6,000 rupees per participant. It's going to happen in Chennai, and it is for the senior embryologists and mid-level embryologists who wants to do conventional IVF in their lab. And it's going to be a totally interactive and a certificate course. So it is a first come, first serve basis. Only 20 participants are going to be included in this campus course. With this, can I just have Dr. Sharayu's CV? Dr. Sharayu is a fertility consultant at Jahangir IVF Pune and at Novo Solitaire Care Karadi Pune. She is a fellow of reproductive medicine under Dr. Sachin Kulkarni, who is a great legend and a great mentor. Diploma in reproductive medicine from Dubai, and she's also an international faculty for IVF courses in IBC Dubai. Without much ado, I would like Dr. Sharayu to take the virtual floor and take us through clinical KPIs and how do we align in our day-to-day practice to give the best outcomes to our patients. Over to you, Dr. Sharayu.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. For the first time, I would like to thank you and the platform you and Dr. Sindhuja started as a scale. And it is a really good academic sessions you all conducting. So hats off to your efforts and giving a consistent academic knowledge. And that is what the craving, we would like to look for. So I'll just mention. Can you see my screen now? Am I audible?
Yes, it's visible. Screen is also visible. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, just slide away here. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So, as Dr. Vasundhara ma'am was mentioning about the lab KPI has been already discussed in the last lecture. Today, the topic is aligning this KPI of lab with the clinical outcomes, and this is what we see in our practice in our day-to-day life, that how we should monitor or audit ourselves through KPI. So whatever I'm going to present today is what are the knowledge I shared from Sachin sir, and with his blessing, I'll start my session. So as we understand that infertility is a biological phenomenon and it's not a certain diagnosis. So it's not about, there are multiple heterogeneity when we think about fertility. Like, there is a normal fertility. There could be a patient where there is taking some time, or there could be a subtle issue which can be labeled as subfertility. Or the patient is not able to conceive, where we can label the patient as infertility. Or there could be some indications of infertility where it could be reversible. Like, if there is problem, if there is uterine polyp or fibroid which is there, and if we remove that, then the patient will be able to conceive. So there are heterogeneous things and diagnosis and indication to go ahead with treatment we see in our day-to-day practice. Subfertility is delay in conceiving, and infertility is inability to conceive, but it is interchangeable. Many of the time, the word which we use, infertility, is a misnomer, and it could be subfertility in a better prognosis. So there are multiple factors which are associated, and there are multiple stages how the patient can be evaluated and treated when they approach us for infertility. So why it is necessary? So it is a meticulous tracking of the biological journey. And what is our ethos? Ethos is of establishing the system process. So whenever we talk about doing reproductive medicine practice, it's all about the evidence-based practice, the protocols that we follow. But finally, what we are more interested in, the clinical outcome. And it is very important that how we establish the process to have that journey of reproductive outcome. So key performance indicators, these are quantifiable measures used by the clinic or enterprise to meet the strategic and operational goals. So in our day-to-day practice also, like, we calculate what is our IUI pregnancy rate, what is our routine, pregnancy rate in terms of blastocyst formation and other things. So we always have certain goals at the end of it. And these performance indicators, these are seen as a good way to check that healthcare is working well and within safety guidelines. This is most important. Whenever we talk about the reproductive medicine practice, it has to be a good healthcare giver, but with that, it has to be followed with the safety guidelines, and not because whatever the procedure which is we are offering is an elective one, and we need not have taken away these safety guidelines when we are practicing our day-to-day clinics. Are the KPI sensitive and relevant enough? This is the most important question. So how we can justify when we see, nowadays, sometimes now many of us have changed now to single embryo transfer. But we see multiple pregnancy rate very common, and people have that myth that IVF pregnancy is equal to multiple pregnancy. So 60% pregnancy rate, if you have with 20% pregnancy, is a poorer outcome than 40% pregnancy rate with less than 5% twin pregnancy. So what does it mean? Like, whenever your clinical outcome, if your clinic is performing with 60% of pregnancy rate, but you have 20% of them are multiple pregnancy, means you're not going to do justice, because we know that multiple pregnancy invite lot of complication which are obstetrics, preterm delivery, low birth weight, NICU admissions, and so on and so forth. So with the 40% pregnancy rate, if you have less than 5% twin pregnancy rate, I think these parameters will give you more live birth rate when in terms of clinical outcome. Shady practices of multiple embryo transfer and inviting obstetrical and prenatal risk must be discouraged, and that is why this statement is important, that how we should have that KPI with safety guidelines. Plenty of study and reporting flaws due to patient confounders, mixed etiology of infertility, multiple cycles of treatment. So whenever we see, and many of the times whenever we go through any of the publication, there are many confounders. Sometimes age is a confounder, BMI is a confounder, AMH is a confounder. There could be a combination. The PCOS can be associated with endometriosis. There could be PCOS women with oligospermia with the male factor. So, and the patient will take multiple cycles of treatment. So these are all studies which have been published. They are completely reporting flaws at the end of it. And at the end of every study, there could be some limitations which mentions all these confounders. So either single cycle or multiple cycle. So that may decide what is your FOI, what is your FOD. So what I'm talking about, when we talk about AMIGO study, which was been done for the comparison between clomiphene citrate, letrozole, and gonadotropin, and in unexplained infertility when in terms of IUI. So they talked about giving this treatment and seeing the live birth rate over the cycles. But when Richard Ragro has published a paper about ovulation induction cycle with lifestyle over multiple cycles. So the difference of these two studies will be single cycles over multiple cycles. So their parameters in terms of outcome will change. Their outcomes in regards to pregnancy rate or live birth rate also will change. So pregnancy success is like a tossing a coin. Inherent low fecundity in humans that we all know very well know of, and sporadic failures are more common than true RIF. So true RIF doesn't exist, but we see more of these sporadic failures, and that's why, this is mainly because of the low fecundity rate of the human. So whenever we think about KPI, we know that whatever the rate we calculate, whether it could be your blastocyst formation rate, whether it could be your FOAT, FOI, we know it has numerator and denominator when we talk about live birth rate, clinical pregnancy rate. But the denominator is important parameter on which all the success rate can change. So this was one beautiful paper which talk about there is no common denominator. So what they have done is they have they have studied 142 art cities, which is published in 2013 and to 14, and reported numerators and denominators in these particular RCTs was been extracted, and this was been studied in this particular study. So if you see, about 800 combinations of numerator and denominator reported in various of the studies of 142 RCTs, and most combination was only used once. So whenever we talk about KPI or to improve our audit, it should be we should have a same combination to have the audit success parameter for a comparison. But if you see, as the numerator and denominator changes, the outcome also changes. And this was paper which talk about the denominator is the conveyor of the evidence. What you take denominator is most important. The denominator could be per treated cycle, it could be per embryo transfer, or per blastocyst transfer. So as the denominator change, the outcome will change. So massive diversity in numerator and denominator selection in IVF trials is due to its multi-stage nature, causes methodological poor outcome. So this denominator and numerator could be because of many confounders what we see, and multiple stages of the nature how we are taking this patient for IVF cycle. So to give an example, when we talk about how the denominator can change the outcome. So live birth rate can be with per oocyte retrieval. Live birth rate can be, the denominator can be per embryo transfer. For live birth rate, the denominator can be per new patient started. So add to above means when we talk about live birth rate per oocyte retrieval, it may have that at the end of that oocyte retrieval it was a poor response, and we may not have embryo, or we have only one embryo. So the percentage will be on the lower side. If we talk about live birth rate per embryo transfer, now the denominator is completely changing. To have that one embryo, we really don't know whether the patient has taken one cycle, whether she had two cycles cancellation, and then she had this embryo. We really don't know. But now, if you take only per embryo transfer as a denominator, the outcome will be more better if she already have previous failed cycles. If the denominator is per new patient started, then again the live birth rate will change, because it takes into consideration from the beginning of the cycle, what protocol you have used, how is the outcome, and then the FOAT, FO, and everything will come into the picture. And then per new patient started, your live birth rate will change according to the denominator. To add all these things, when we add in this and we consider the different age group of the patients which we are taking for IVF, whether it is a fresh or frozen embryo transfer, whether it is third party reproduction, use of ICSI or PGTA, all this will make this whole thing totally confusing, because all these are confounding factors which are going to contribute to your outcome as live birth rate. So effect of intervention defined without intention to treat denominator, we should must be understood well. So the denominator can be, as we saw, it could be per oocyte retrieval, it could be per embryo transfer. So what is the intention to treat that denominator? Without that, it is should be then the intervention should be identified. If the randomization is per started cycle, this is more relevant to couples deciding to undertake the IVF, because then you are randomizing patient as per the started cycle, and not regarding the retrospective diagnosis what could be the outcome of that particular lab. Now, when we talk about denominator, let's make it simple with this explanation. As we all aware about the two studies which have been published in PGTA, which was identified as a landmark, which was been published in 2019 as a STAR trial by Munne et al., where PGTA versus morphology as selection criteria for single frozen embryo transfer in good prognosis patient. And this STAR study, later on dissected by Rolla Orioto. And these two paper which has been published, first STAR trial and second is analysis of STAR trial, they will give that how the denominator is important when you count your outcome in related to the live birth rate. So when we talk about 1 minute, so sorry for this. So when we talk about reanalyze STAR study, so randomization was let's focus on STAR study now. In STAR study, the randomization was started after getting two blastocysts, which can be biopsied and vitrified. So women producing two blasts definitely have better prognosis than those producing one. So as we read the title, the patients what they have chosen is also better with good prognosis patient, and they randomize when they have at least two morphological good blastocysts. So randomization was itself at it should be early when they are entering the patient is entering into a trial. That time the randomization should have been started, but they randomize when they have two morphologically good blastocysts at the end, and then they divided the patient into a control group and a study group. So intention to treat was defined as patients undergoing randomization. So in this particular study, total women 984, 661 randomized study. In group, it was 330 and in control group, it was 331. Amongst 323 excluded, 167 failed to obtain two blastocysts. From intent to treatment, they should not have excluded. Half, that 83, must be added to the denominator. So in this particular study, as I talked that, as I spoke in last slide, that the randomization was after two blastocysts and not when the patient entered. But there are patients who didn't had blastocysts obtained and they were excluded when they in this particular study when they were included in the group after randomization because it was post two blastocyst formation. So 42 women developed blast but not euploid, hence excluded. So again, this was not taken into consideration. 6 in study and 4 in control group embryo did not survive thawing, so hence excluded. So they have just taken patients only after randomization with two morphology good blastocysts, either in control group or with PGTA, but these were the patients where they are excluded. So all these should have been added to the denominator. But in STAR trial, when they did not they excluded the population which we just talked about, the ongoing pregnancy rate per embryo transfer is 50% in study group and 46% in control group. It was not statistically significant. But look at this study. They have not taken all these parameters into consideration where the patient had not formed blastocysts or they had been excluded from the treatment, or the patient who did not have euploid blastocysts, or embryo didn't survive after the thawing of the embryo. So now when this was detected by Rolla Orioto, and when he recalculated the ongoing pregnancy rate with the denominator which we just saw. So when the randomization would have done prior, where the patient has not reached to the blastocyst stage, even that has taken into consideration. Those who didn't form euploid blastocyst, that also taken into consideration, or the embryo which is not been expanded, that also taken as a denominator. So after recalculation and having this denominator, 33.8% in study and 35.8% in control group. So now you see here there is a 50% ongoing pregnancy rate in study group and 46% in control group in actual STAR study. But after recalculating and considering denominator with all these factors, the percentage change. The 35 to 40 age group is reanalyzed. PGTA group 31.6% ongoing pregnancy rate, and control group 28% ongoing pregnancy rate. So after the reanalysis of the data between these age women, the PGTA group had has better pregnancy, 31.6% ongoing pregnancy rate, and control group was 28% when the age was more than 35. So this is just an example that how the denominator can change the percentage in terms of the outcome when we don't consider and the randomization was done at a later and it is not intention to treat. So proponents of PGTA, RCT only to know if live birth rate was improved. So this trials was mainly aiming towards that. But advantage of PGTA is not improving live birth rate, but in avoiding futile transfers and sparing women of miscarriage. But the most important question is, are couples paying extra cost to decrease their chance of miscarriage without improving chance of live birth rate? Because STAR trial also had given that there is no significant difference either do PGTA or you don't do PGTA in patients who are having a good prognosis. It matters only when that too not statistically significant between 35 to 40 years of age group. But otherwise, the patient is paying lots of money only for going for PGTA just to reduce the chance of miscarriages. But we really don't know whether the live birth rate will improve or not. Denominator cannot be per started cycle for all the RCTs, because let's say now when we talk about the previous studies, it is the per started cycle could have been the denominator. But when we talk about particular intervention which is to be done to improve the outcome of embryo transfer, for example, for trial of intrauterine HCG prior to embryo transfer, denominator will be per embryo transfer, will offer clearer view than per started cycle. Because what happens for the stimulation, whether the patient had embryo, whether the blastocysts were formed, whether it was multiple stimulation, that is immaterial when the already the embryo is there. And now you are doing intervention to improve upon the embryo transfer outcome. So in those particular, for example, in this particular trial, the denominator will be per embryo transfer and not per started cycle. Then the faster the study can be done and we'll be able to correlate the outcome very well. Now, there could be studies where the primary outcome and surrogate outcome, we will take the surrogate outcome as our objective to prove our primary outcome. So failure to improve a surrogate marker. So you can desert the study and not take into live birth rate. But the success at surrogate outcome does not mean live birth rate will improve as well. So, for example, when we talk about non-male factor infertility or unexplained infertility, that time also we do ICSI with the risk of should not be a failure of fertilization. So this reduction and fear in total fertilization failure is justification for universal ICSI even for non-male infertility. But improved fertilization does not translate to live birth rate. So whatever the intervention of ICSI we are doing, that is to improve the fertilization, but that doesn't mean that will convert into a improvement in the live birth rate, because for the live birth rate there could be many confounding factor including our age, AMH, depending on the uterus pathology, and so many things could be responsible as for live birth rate as an outcome. So in this particular thing, we can't take fertilization rate as a surrogate outcome for live birth rate, because even the fertilization rate is very good, it could be 70 to 80%, but the live birth rate could be lower than that because there are so many confounding factors which we take into consideration at the end of the study. Shall live birth rate be always a primary outcome? So when we have seen multiple studies, many of the time we see that live birth rate is not an outcome and it could be only clinical pregnancy rate or ongoing pregnancy rate. So Farkar et al. In 2017, the meta-analysis was published or addition of LH to RFSH protocol. So addition of LH to RFSH, 4 studies been published which talk about increased live birth rate with good odds ratio and confidence interval. With ongoing pregnancy rate as endpoint, 12 RCTs, no benefit of adding LH. So look, how the outcome has different in both the studies. In one, addition of LH has increased live birth rate, but in another, there is no benefit of adding LH when they have taken this ongoing pregnancy rate as endpoint. So possibly only studies showing benefit of LH to live birth rate were followed till live birth rate. And that's why these two different scenarios which we have looked upon addition of LH in stimulation. Ongoing pregnancy rate, 12 out of 17 studies, more commonly repeated. LH addition influences the pregnancy, but not its course to live birth rate. So this is very important that it will influence the pregnancy, but it's not goes to the live birth rate. So live birth rate need not be a primary outcome each time. It could be ongoing pregnancy. It could be just like, having a top quality blast. Even that can be a primary outcome at the end of it. To give an example, as we are very well aware about Lotus 1 and Lotus 2 studies, which is for the dydrogesterone compared to vaginal progesterone. So in these trials, the outcome was ongoing pregnancy rate. So they followed the pregnancy only till 6 weeks of the pregnancy and was not reported as live birth rate. Since luteal support drug has not much role to determine live birth, and many more confounders are added like anemia, PIH twins, and antenatal complications to have live birth rate. It could be BMI of the patient. It could be another obstetrical complication. So these particular Lotus 1 and Lotus study are comparing progesterone, either it is oral versus vaginal progesterone. So in that things, it is a drug in the luteal phase support we are comparing, and that for that the outcome need not be live birth rate or ongoing pregnancy rate could be a justifiable outcome in those trials. This was also one of the nice study which has been published in 2021 RBM Online. The measuring success in IVF is a complex multidisciplinary task. So most consumer-friendly measure of success is take-home baby rate, and this is the most everyone will be interested to have as a good outcome. So cumulative birth delivery rate per intention to treat, one or multiple live birth after one aspirated cycle till all embryos use either with fresh or frozen embryo transfer. So in this particular case, when there was oocyte retrieval and per aspirated cycle, if we have more and more number of embryos, till the time we are using all the embryos, that will be calculated as CLBDR. So this denominator includes women not reached OPU and embryo transfer. So when we talk about this cumulative live birth delivery rate, which is intention to treat, it does not account burden of the treatment. So metrics of reduction in IVF related to burden of treatment could be the time to pregnancy rate, the cost which is been involved in all these factors, the emotional stress the patient is undergoing till the time she is ending and having embryo transfer, and the outcome, the possibility of OHSS in terms of multiple number of eggs retrieved and hyper response, abortions and multiple pregnancies. So these are the parameters which can be accounted, and when it comes to the cumulative live birth delivery rate. Now, these are the clinical scenario which I talked about, and I'm sure all of us are very, very well versed with the FORT, that is nothing but the follicle which has been retrieved 16 to 20 millimeter at the day of trigger, divided by at the start of stimulation, that is AFC, which is baseline. FOI is number of oocytes per AFC started, and ovarian sensitivity index of oocytes is equal to oocytes which has been retrieved divided by total gonadotropin dose. So when we talk about mature oocyte, it is mature oocyte per total OCC retrieved. So when we talk about this FORT FOI, we see lot of confounding factors, and this could be AMH, AFS, AFC, FSH, age, indication why we are taking this patient for IVF, BMI, FSH dose, HMG stimulation. All these things are going to have the dose and duration of the FSH. That is going to decide your FORT. Then on the day of trigger, the performance will be depending on how the OM pickup is done, the embryologist which is involved in how it is skilled enough. Then the FOI will come into the picture. So this M2 oocyte rate, mature oocyte output rate, this is all in terms related with the outcome at the end of oocyte retrieval. But the most important is, now even if we reach, and again there will be a male factor which is being added, and then at the end of it the embryo which has been formed, then if when the PGTA is being involved, so then again we have to go back whether it is getting affected with age and other parameters which is been involved. So basically we are in the FORT FOI, we are not taking consideration all the factors which I have just mentioned now. And in this particular fashion, if we think we are predicting the dynamic nature of follicular growth, which depends on many factors. As we just discussed, it could be AMH, FC, FSH, it could be BMI, it could be age, it could be diffusion of gonadotropins to the granular cell, it could be receptor status of that particular thing. But this FORT, FOI or oocyte sensitivity index, these are not the KPI which is giving a full information from the starting of the IVF cycle till the time of endpoint. And this was a beautiful paper by Sesh Shankara group, which has been published in 2025. And they redefined this key performance indicator, which we just discussed now, in the form of extended KPI for ovarian stimulation. So current KPI, ovarian oocyte sensitivity index, FORT, oocyte retrieval rate, and FOI. But no specific KPI is dedicated to the assessment of follicular development in terms of recruitment, selection, growth, and dominance. So as we just saw that FORT is equal to follicle more than 16 millimeter divided by the baseline AFC. So here we are just considering the start day and the last day, but we are not knowing the dynamics of stimulation are not been measured. Particularly when we are talking about the antagonist cycle, we start with synchrony and the whole cycle could be asynchronous. So in that case, if we don't follow up or we don't consider the in-between dynamics of recruitment, selection, and dominance, we may not be able to have a good performance indicator at the end of it. So in this particular patient, in this particular paper, they extended this FORT to early FORT, where number of follicles measuring more than 10 to 11 millimeter on day 5 or 6 of the stimulation. So instead of taking only start day of the basal AFC and the last day of trigger, they have taken into consideration the day 6 of the stimulation, and they calculated it by number of follicles measuring more than 10 to 12 millimeter on day 5 or day 6. To the denominator is same, that is AFC. So this early FORT, that is follicles beyond 10 millimeter on day 6 of the stimulation, this is a very important parameter because the dose which you have started according to the characteristic of the patient or depending on the previous response of the stimulation, on this particular time, this is the last opportunity to change the dose, which can rescue the cycle or prevent OHSS. Because on this day 5 or day 6, if you are seeing there is a poor response or there is a lot of asynchrony, you may have to adjust the dose. Or if there is a poor response, you may have to step up the dose with the hormonal report. We may take that call later, but it is very important. If you don't consider that parameter and we just consider the first day and last day, we may miss this opportunity to change the dose or rescue the cycle. Or if the initial 5 days only the patient has hyperstimulation, then what adding antagonist, giving planning agonist trigger, segmentation of the IVF and freezing, that can be planned if we take early FORT as our KPI. Biological roadblock is detected in time. Rigidity of protocol disappears. So whenever we are thinking about this adjusting our dose, it is the protocol what we can modify. So the extended KPI, again we talked about FORT, but the modified FORT in this particular paper, they talk about ratio between number of follicles which is beyond 12 millimeter at the oocyte maturation on the trigger day and AFC. As we learned, the previous parameter has considered only the on the trigger day divided by the AFC. So in this particular parameter of FORT, they have taken consideration the follicles between 16 to 22 millimeter. But in antagonist cycle, we see the follicle which has been asynchronous, and even if we aspirate 12 millimeter follicle, we may get a COC in that. So in this particular paper, why they have taken this modified FORT is because considering all the factors, and it is not just 16 to 22 millimeter, and we should consider the smaller size also. That's why this FORT has been modified as a modified FORT is a extended KPI. So reporting more than 12 millimeter and more than 16 millimeter on trigger day shall convey a synchronous growth, and that can decide your trigger decision. If you have too much of asynchronous growth and you are targeting trigger and the patient, depending on the patient oocyte number, you have now thought of giving both HCG as well as agonist trigger. So then you can decide if it is too much of a synchrony, you will go for double trigger. If the synchronicity is not that bad and the cohort is quite synchronous, then you can go for dual trigger also. That is why this modified FORT is considering more than 12 millimeter follicle and not just beyond 16 millimeter, and that's why they have modified this as a modified FORT. So when we talk about this KPI, how we can analyze our lab KPI, or how we can see whether our lab is performing good or not. So this was a nice paper which give you idea about usable blastocyst rate in early indicator of clinically significant shift in the embryo culture system. So aim of this particular paper was to assess whether the embryology KPI, which was been given by Vienna consensus, whether they will detect the shifts in the laboratory performance. So what they have done over 5 months culture media, in this particular clinic, they have shifted from sequential to one-step media, and they found there is a drop in the pregnancy rate detected after 5 months. So total blastocyst usable rate remains same in spite of change of this medium. 41% of media was being changed, but day 5 blastocyst usable rate dropped from 43% to 32% within 1 week of shifting of these two new media. They observed decrease in clinical pregnancy rate from 54% to 41% was also observed, but this was not detected until 3 months after the usable day 5 blastocyst rate shift. So initially, what parameter came into the picture was the usable day 5 blastocyst rate that declined within 1 week period. But to understand there is a decrease in clinical pregnancy rate, it almost took 3 months. So cumulative clinical pregnancy rate as such for the clinic was remained same for this 3 time period, but what changed was the usable day 5 blastocyst rate. So one matrix of speed comes in live birth rate reality was exposed that embryo quality was bad. So not relevant to check the embryo at the end of assembly line, but important is if it is reached there in 5 days. So this paper gives a very nice idea that though the total blastocyst means the total blastocyst which was blastocyst usable rate was same, even the cumulative pregnancy rate was same, but what first changes parameter was the day 5 blastocyst usable rate within a week. Then they saw that over 3 months the clinical pregnancy rate also was changed. So can we predict high quality blastulation rate? Select or adhere to media oils what we use. If that protocol or that media is giving you a consistent result, then shifting may invite some trouble. But if at all you are going to shift, then you have to see this day 5 usable blastocyst rate, that can be the first parameter to analyze, and not the cumulative live birth rate or overall blastocyst rate. So that means it is giving you a transparency and accountability. So data driven decision making in clinic, it depends on what parameters. So this is an example in laboratory parameter also, what should be the parameter which can first fall back, and that will impact your pregnancy rate, and that you have to first analyze. Embryo morphology data continuously done over years can train your own AI for ready-made embryo grading. So monitor embryo quality KPI in general. Morphology data KPI is integral view of laboratory culture conditions. So when we talk about all these KPI, then we have to take into the laboratory condition also in account. So as we all aware about Vienna consensus, which has been published in 2017, and it gives a competence and benchmark for recommended KPIs so far. As Madam has said that in last lecture, all these been discussed. So I have just put up a slide, but I'm not going to discuss in detail. Now, about cryopreservation. So this was published in 2012, and Alpha Consensus meeting cryopreservation as a key performance indicators and benchmark. So it is almost 14-year-old data, mainly in era where there was a slow freezing rather than vitrification. So now we have shifted our clinical practice from fresh embryo transfer to freeze-all, PGTA, and single embryo or single euploid transfer. So cryopreservation KPI will unlock the frozen perspective, and this could be in the form of more single embryo transfer, freeze-all policies, no HSS clinic, implementation of PGTA, fertility preservation, and OOSAT banking. So for all these indication, we should have our cryopreservation KPI, and because maximum our cycles are frozen embryo transfer cycles, and either they are going for PGTA or patients who are approaching for fertility preservation. Now, what factors can affect the vitrification outcome? It could be environmental factor like benchtop temperature, cabinet airflow, environmental temperature. What procedures can affect post-warming culture conditions, embryologists for vitrification and for thawing, depending on their skill and the time which they are taking for these procedures. So cryopreservation KPI could be blastocyst survival rate, which is calculated by percentage of surviving blastocysts per number of blasts thawed. So at least 75% of cell perceived to be intact when we thaw the embryos, and that will tell you that you have a good blastocyst survival rate. Quality of blast prior to cryo may affect this thing, and that we have to keep in our mind. Expansion rate at 2 hours after warming is equal to timing of biopsy to vitrification. So with this thing, percentage of expanded blasts per number of warm blasts is important. So if the expansion rate we calculate according to this, we'll get that within what time the blastocyst is getting expanded, and that will give you an idea about the KPI. Inconclusive PGTA biopsy rate. So whenever you have less than 2% of inclusive PGTA biopsy rate in your clinic, means that will measure the embryology skill set. If you are more inconclusive PGTA biopsy rate, maybe we have to do validation, and we have to see that what all the procedures the embryologist is doing when invasive PGT is done. So mosaic embryo rate, if the mosaic embryo rate of your clinic is more than 15%, there is a red flag for laboratory errors. Now, euploid pregnancy rate, that is also one of the factors which again come with a lot of heterogeneity with measure of what NGS platform is used, the frozen embryo transfer technique, what is been used, and how it is been executed, depending on the skill set, and depending again on how the blastocyst has expanded or not. So all these things will take into consideration when we talk about euploid pregnancy rate. Euploid miscarriage rate, again, that will be related to the NGS platform, what we have used, and that will give you an idea that how we have to go ahead with the final analysis. Now, when we talk about the failed thaw cycle by diagnosis, you could be having a failed thaw cycle, and this was a STAR data analysis where they talk about frozen thaw cycle in patient with diminished ovarian reserve when they have not done PGTA and when they have done PGTA. So if you look both the figures, then we'll come to know that whenever they have compared the failed thaw cycle by diagnosis, either with the PGTA or non-PGTA, there is a difference in the percentage of the failed thaw cycle at the end of it. So the proportion of frozen failed thaw cycle was highest for patient with diminished ovarian reserve in this particular data. Failed thaw cycle as key performance indicator, thaw procedure that failed to produce any transferable embryo. Can an infertility diagnosis additional to PGTA affect the failed thaw cycle? Yes, that could be the one of the additional factor, because a post embryo biopsy or post PGTA, the embryo again has to arrange its cells, and then we go for freezing. But then when we again thaw before putting the embryo transfer, so that could be an additional factor where we have to think this failed thaw cycle as KPI, and it can be different if we do PGTA and if we don't do PGTA. So PGTA KPI is evolving story. Above 37 years, more embryos are genetically abnormal, that is aneuploid. But what is true, euploidy rate in young population. So we didn't get a data about euploidy rate of younger population in many of the publications. But when I put this data on ChatGPT about the euploidy rate in younger population, depending as a evolving parameter of KPI. So these were the authors which has published in 2014 to till 2025, and the euploidy rate among 20 to 35 years been differentiated from 53% to maximum of 75%. So they will be having different, when it was donor oocyte study, the euploidy rate was more. When it was cell cycle, that time the euploidy rate was different. So this was the KPI which again talked about how it will differ along with the age, and how it will reflect into the PGTA KPI parameters. This was again a beautiful study which was been published in 2020, and it really talks about how we should have our ethical practice in terms of giving success rate with our reproductive medicine clinic. So they talked about 3 simple metrics to define IVF's success rate. So KPI should be have like simplicity and transparency. This is a paramount of KPI. The matrix should no longer accommodate the kind of loopholes that mislead the reporting and should not reward suboptimal practices such as multiple embryo transfer. So what does it mean? That whenever we think about KPI or any matrix to calculate our clinic prognosis, there should be a transparency and should not have any loopholes when you are reporting at the end of it. Just because you want to increase your success rate, doing multiple embryo transfer is not justifiable. So they use these three simple metrics effectively to describe the clinical outcome from ART. The first one is probability of having no embryo for transfer, that capture all failure prior to actual embryo transfer. So the second one is sustained implantation rate, probability of delivering per embryo transfer. And the third one is number of supernumerary embryos per treatment cycle, describe efficiency of the cycle, which may result in additional opportunity to conceive in future. Let's see one by one. So probability of no embryo transfer, no embryo available to transfer. So this metric incorporate all the causes of failure from initiation of the cycle up to point immediately before the actual embryo transfer. So we have to take into consideration all these parameters when we talk about this particular matrix of no embryo available at the time of transfer. So patient will know failing risk, whether it is due to poor ovarian stimulation, whether it is because of the failed fertilization, whether it is because of the poor embryo development, or whether it is because of the abnormal PGTA result. So why these three metrics are important? These are important for you to counsel the patient. And that is nothing but a transparency what your clinic is offering to the patient who is undergoing, who is going to take IVF cycle with you. So these all parameters is necessary to incorporate when we talk about this metric. Then about sustained implantation rate, using this matrix, crucially negates the perverse incentive to perform multiple embryo transfer at the expense of increased multiple gestational rate. It reflects the capacity of program to attain embryo capable of live birth rate. So it depends on your transferred one embryo. So that particular embryo, whether it is giving you a live birth rate or not, and that is will be determined with this sustained implantation rate. So as in our initial slide, I discussed that if your clinic is giving 60% pregnancy rate, but 20% is multiple pregnancy rate, it's a poor outcome. With 40% of clinical pregnancy rate, less than 5% of multiple pregnancy rate is still a good good outcome of your clinic. So no benefit of reporting excellence in development rates if they do not transfer into high sustained implantation rate. And then, the third parameter, the third parameter was number of supernumerary embryos per treatment cycle. So it tells you that when you have supernumerary embryo, it will tell you about your cryopreservation KPI also. Second thing, if the first cycle is successful, then offering the second cycle to complete the family will be a really good situation. Or if the first transfer is failed, then you have multiple other embryos to transfer. So then the number of supernumerary embryos per treatment cycle will have this additional opportunity to conceive in future as well. So these are three metrics this paper have devised. And apart from that, they have also talked about safety metrics, which is a proportion of low birth weight less than 1.5 kg and multiple gestational rate. The most important parameter what they have analyzed is number needed to harm. So how many treatment cycle for one low birth or one twin pregnancy also has to be seen when we talk about safety metrics. So these metrics evaluate clinics objectively in a manner independent of any given approach or strategy, because they focus on measuring the success strictly through quality of care. And this is the most important why I really like this paper, that it talks about these metrics and the safety guidelines when we do our clinical practice, and the transparency and counseling has to be done on these parameters. So oocyte survival rate, it is a percentage of surviving eggs per number of warmed or thawed eggs. Fertilization rate is defined as fertilized oocytes percentage number of per number of surviving oocytes, and usable blastocyst number of transfer blast per number of fertilized oocytes. Then, this presentation won't be complete if I don't talk about Mariver consensus, which talked about the performance indicator for clinical practice in ART. So we need to define clearly the KPI for ART, especially for our clinical work. So diagnosis and indications of infertility, ovarian stimulation monitoring, trigger and ovum pickup, and embryo transfer and pregnancy. These are our clinical work, what we do in our day-to-day practice, in our IVF lab, in our practice. So we need to define clear KPI for these situations when we want to audit ourselves in terms of increasing the performance. So in this particular paper, they talked about competence and benchmark values. What should be the minimum and what should be the highest goal which can be your goal in terms of performance of your clinic. So the cycle cancellation rate before ovum pickup, it is the number of cycle cancelled before OPU per number of started cycle. So the competence is 5%, benchmark I think I have mistaken. It is 3.7% versus 5% versus 3.75%. So rate of cycle with moderate or severe OHSS, that is number of cycle with moderate to severe OHSS in percentage per number of started cycle. Proportion of M2 oocytes at ICSI. So number of M2 oocyte at ICSI in percentage per number of COC complex retrieved. So this gives you an idea what should be the competence at this particular level when we are practicing in terms of your day-to-day practice, the cancellation rate at OPU, OHSS rate, and proportion of M2 retrieve at the end of the cycle. Another clinical parameters is complication rate after OPU, number of complication that require additional medical intervention or hospital admission apart from OHSS in percentage per number of OPUs performed. Clinical pregnancy rate, that is number of pregnancies visualized on scan with gestational sac, percentage per embryo transfer, and multiple pregnancy rate, mean number of pregnancies of more than one embryo in percentage per number of pregnancies achieved. So these are the clinical parameters what we should look upon when in our day-to-day clinical practice. Indicators of ovulation monitoring, triggering, and OPU. Empty follicle syndrome, more of a sporadic event in both true or false. So we don't see very often when we are taking care of all the things about trigger and stimulation. Oocyte retrieval rate, that is ORR, reflection of quality of patient monitoring, trigger decision, duration of 10 to 14 days, majority of follicles beyond 16 to 22 millimeter. So this is again one parameter we should look upon. Proportion of M2 oocyte I already talked about. Indicators for embryo transfer and pregnancy. Main determinant of successful embryo transfer is the operator. And KPI for embryo transfer is implantation rate. Ectopic and multiple pregnancies conveys the safety of embryo transfer. If you push the embryo very fast, it can give rise to ectopic pregnancy. If you transfer multiple embryos, it will give you rise to multiple pregnancy rate. So these are the indicators what we follow at the time of embryo transfer and pregnancy. So clinical pregnancy rate is a measure of clinician's efficiency, not safety, since ectopic pregnancy and twins not been excluded when we talk about clinical pregnancy rate. Number of clinical pregnancy per number of embryo transfer is the most appropriate to assess the operator skill who is doing embryo transfer. Direct engagement of patients in decision making is very important. So at the end, why this KPI is important? To maintain transparency, counseling, to audit ourselves, to improve our lab performance, fulfill the expectation of couple success rate, and respect the empathy. Non-futile treatment versus unrealistic expectation. So you can have a clear numerical counseling. Unless you audit yourself or you don't follow your KPI, your counseling is going to be very difficult, because when you have your KPI, you can counsel your patient confidently, that in the numerical format where it could be a transparent, and when you are giving a realistic expression to them, they know whether they should go ahead with the treatment which can be futile or they can have unrealistic expectation. Embryologist KPI which we can think about, which have not been discussed and there are no papers published on that, could be oocyte donation rate from follicular fluid which is mixed with blood. Clinician KPI, ovum keep up, that ovum pickup, where number of OCs is retrieved from recruited herd, total number of gonadotropin consumption. There should be a nurse's KPI also, where the mistakes which has been done when the injection is given for ovarian stimulation, how they have communicated with patients. So even these clinical KPI should be included to audit ourselves to improve upon the outcome of our lab. So no need to KPI centric all the time, but AI generated KPI will double-edged sword because the biological factor shall impact KPI in a scientific way. Sometimes in our clinic, we see that many of the patient in that one particular month will be spurt of cases with TC sperm used that will affect your KPI. Batch of all women will be more than 38 years in one particular month, or in one particular month you are getting patients who are operated with endometriosis. So depending on these biological factors that also impact our KPI in a scientific way. So we must establish the national averages and compare to the gold standard with our committees of ESAR, IFS and FOXY. So how many of these KPI have you really evaluated in your practice? That is a question. And do you have a quality control person looking in? So all of us should go through this QI accreditation, which is given on this particular website. So you will come to know what SOPs you should follow, what you should audit to improve on the performance of your clinic in both the ways, with the clinical transparency with the patient and in terms of number when we talk about the success in terms of live birth rate. Thank you so much for your patient hearing. I think I have taken a lot of time, but thank you for everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharayu, for the truly, truly insightful and very close to heart topic for all of us. It's a very, very vital topic, which you have taken so much pain to review the literature and, tell us what we, do in our day-to-day practice and how we can improve our practice based on all your inputs. It is not a very, the KPIs are not very static endpoints. I think the integration is very important between the lab and the clinics. And it was very, very, clinically relevant to all of us. And I do, appreciate your KPIs in terms of extending it to, nurses KPI or anything else, because it's very, very critical. It's not one thing that we need to look at the stimulation protocol or how we do the egg retrieval or how we do the embryo transfer. There are so many factors. So there are a few questions. So before that, I would want to just ask you that, yes, that Maribor consensus is excellent for all of us to go through, and we should, incorporate those points into our day-to-day lab audits. What do you do? What do you really recommend in terms of how frequently we must be doing audits? Because again, it depends on number of cycles. And when we look at clinical KPIs, sometimes we feel like auditing every case. See, as far as lab audit is concerned, you look at cycle numbers and then decide you want to do a quarterly audit or you want to do a monthly audit based on the cycle volume. So whether we need to, categorize certain things. And for example, like as you were mentioning, if we just audit in 1 month, we have more poor prognosis patients and, or TISA patients, our, audits is going to fluctuate. So we are going to have a internal discussion with our team and define certain denominators, have certain definitions of our KPIs and then work. So how do we work? You please, share your practical insights.
So what we practice, ma'am, we do this KPI for the embryology every monthly. It need not to be that the volume based, because then you will be able to understand that where it has gone wrong, when you are use the stimulation protocol. And the most important thing is any intervention you do, for the comparison you should have the KPIs to understand, and then only you will come to know that why particular protocol we had less number of blastosis, why these particular patients have asynchrony. All these parameters will come into picture and that way. So we believe that the monthly KPI has to be there. So in our practice also, we use the clinical pregnancy rate. We have a protocol where we calculate the total gonadotropin dose. Now, and then only we can refine ourselves that which protocol will be used for a particular population. So basically the individualized based protocol, how, when we talk about, say, Shankara paper, it is very important how nicely they have extended the extended food, because they are taking into consideration on day 6 of the stimulation. It is must, because unless you are doing that particular thing, then it is not possible for us to adjust the dose or see whether the patient is having hyper response or poor immune response, addition of LH, or whether we have to go for fixed ANTA or flexible ANTA. That will be completely missed if we just follow the food. So honestly, we have not started extended FORT as of now. What we are actually doing is about our KPI of the embryology. But this is, we have just discussed and we have started formulating that whenever we are doing all these things, we should have. So I think monthly KPI is one thing which we always should look for. Depending, anyhow, we can audit at 3 months later for the comparison part, but at this particular month by the clear. And as we discussed, there could be many confounding factors. As in our last slide I was talking about, there could be biological factors. In one particular month you have all the patients with poor ovarian disease patients, you have patients with maximum patient with male infertility, then your KPI is going to change. But monthly, when you audit, you will come to know that why it is. The simple thing is the blastocyst expansion rate at the after thawing. Even that is the parameter what we have to look for. So we believe that monthly KPI is must when we talk.
So when we do monthly KPIs, then we can probably segregate those KPIs according to the patient population and then, present. For example, you have 5 patients of poor reserve or 5 patients of good prognosis, and then you benchmark those KPIs and then compare, and then you're feeling safe about
Yes.
it. That could be one thing. And also, I think definitely we audit our complication rates or adverse events or something,
Yeah.
those kind of KPIs as well, right?
And when we have that habit, then obviously we will always look upon whether the patient has faced miscarriage. Because it is not only about the beta HCG positive, it is not only about the implantation rate, it is about till the time she is having live birth rate. So when we maintain this, when we are doing monthly KPI, anyways, we go back that what happened to this patient. So it just improves where it could have gone wrong, and we can improve our this thing performances.
When we're looking about this follicles of more than 10 to 11 millimeters on day 5 or day 6, how robust is this threshold when we look at, different populations, especially when we are looking at Poseidon group, no?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, this again comes to a little bit of FORT only. Let's say when you started, there could be two scenarios. Let me give an example. You could have a patient where you have started, means what we call a suboptimal response, when we have less than 4 to 5 oocytes at the end of it. So that can happen depending on your stimulation protocol. The patient can have receptor polymorphism. You started with 10 number of AFC, but you got 5. And you started with 6 and you got 5. So if in these both the scenarios, if we compare, you have the second scenario is expected response, because you started only with low AFC and that is how your FORT is now this much. But in previous patient, it is a suboptimal response what we calculate. So at this to identify, you need that day 6 on parameter, where you will come to know that when you have started, what was the follicle size, and now whether the follicle has responded. If there is no response, obviously you will see whether it is correlated with your estrogen level also. Then you have to counsel the patient, you may have to increase the dose. Or there could be a parameter where the follicles have high response. In that case, we have to see whether we have to decrease the dose, or whether you have to use agonist dose, like that. That's why the 10 to 12 millimeter, it could be subjective, but it is one parameter which will guide you about the ovarian stimulation, till the time of trigger.
okay.
Yeah.
So when trials report outcomes per embryo transfer, patients who sometimes never reach an embryo transfer are also excluded. So do you
Yes.
think this introduces some sort of a selection bias, especially when we are going to have some, interventions that are planned, like, PGTA or, this thing? So how do
Yeah, it's as we discussed that it is all depend on the denominator what we are taking. So for example, as we give an example, we want to improve upon the embryo transfer rate and intrauterine HCG was being done. So that can't be per started cycle. It could be just because we are doing this intervention to improve upon the outcome of the embryo transfer. It is particular to that particular thing. But when we talk about PGTA giving live birth rate, then as we talked about STAR study and all, when they should have a 2 blastocysts, but there could be few patients who have cycle cancellation. When the denominator changes per started cycle, obviously our outcome is going to suffer. So that's why the denominator is important when it is per embryo transfer. And when we talk about maintaining this KPI throughout, and that's why many of these extended KPI and things are again and again coming. As we saw, there are 800 denominators published in 142 RCTs, and there's so much of data, which is really eye opener for us, that what we take as our denominator will give us. So if at all the intervention is particularly to improve the embryo transfer, Like previously, they were using embryo glue, like now intervention of intrauterine HCG, GCSF, or all this. It will be per embryo transfer. But when it talks about the live birth rate at the end of it, it could be from started the cycle where we have to take into consideration the age, other parameters, and then it will give you an idea.
Okay. So in that case, should the clinics track success rate per embryo transfer or per started cycle separately, both separately?
Yes, it will be both separately. If it is an intervention particular to embryo transfer, it could be per embryo transfer. But if at all you want to calculate, you have to consider how many times the patient have actually undergone the cancellation of the cycle to reach till one blastocyst, and then comes to that.
And end of the day, you think the final KPI is like your cumulative live birth rates?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that is one parameter, but cumulative live birth rate is to be only for good prognosis patient, I'll say, when they have supernumerary embryos where you can take multiple cycle. But what is important is combined live birth rate. Because we can, cumulative live birth rate is from one cycle, we have multiple transfer. But you may have a Poseidon group where you may have to go for multiple cycles, embryo pooling, and then you're going. That is a combined live birth rate and not a cumulative live birth rate. So cumulative live birth rate is okay, but that will be only for a good prognosis patient and not for all patients.
I would like Sachin sir to share his expert comments. 1 minute, I just unmuting sir.
Yeah.
No, actually, nothing an expert comment or something. It is just you asked a very pertaining question of whether we should be doing at embryo transfer, KPI, or per embryo transfer, or per started cycle. So this client could be sitting in front of you, who is a 41-year-old patient. We're just seeing 2 AFCs, and she's asking, "What is my success?" So you say, if I start your cycle and given condition, and if you don't reach an embryo transfer, our KPIs are like so many patients in your category do not reach an embryo transfer. But if you reach an embryo transfer, our success is so and so.
Yes, sir.
So I think it makes a difference. So what we need to counsel the client in front of us, what need to we counsel after we have an embryology report with us, and what we should counsel after we have a PGTA report with us. So that the denominators will keep changing and your success rate will keep varying. So I think gone are the days of putting a blanket success rate of 60%. Now, whenever I hear in conferences that, I was like success 60%, it's a stupid thing. That means you're having a constant patient all the time. It's just not possible. Just not possible. You should say that, well, I'm having a 60% pregnancy rate for women less than 32 years of age when I'm able to transfer 2 blastocysts, which are morphologically good, with a normal uterine cavity. There's so many ifs and buts are always there. So accepting somebody saying 60 to 70% pregnancy rate is, oh, adnyan hai unka. They're showing that they're not knowledgeable enough.
I think, sir, as you said that, won't it be a good idea for us to have a graphical representation of different KPIs when we are counseling the patients, they become more confident. It is a cumbersome process to do it. I have not still done it, though I wish to do it.
No, we do this. Rajvi, that's my junior embryologist. She does this very meticulously.
So your voice is low, sir.
Yeah, my embryologist in Pune does this very meticulously. Now, why I'll tell you it's important. You may have some patient who says no blastocyst formed, and the patient is sitting with a gun on your head saying, "No, why come I got 11 eggs and no blastocyst formed? Is your lab bad?" That's when you put your KPI of that month in front of her. So these are my KPIs of this particular month, or these batches of medias, and what I have done. I've not changed the medias for last 6 months, and this is my KPI. So the problem is you as a confounder, as a patient, and not my lab as a confounder. My lab is very much standardized. To prove that, it is a must to have KPIs. I think the most important take, this will all, what we have studied will all disappear soon. AI will take over this. But then do we have our own AI? Are we going to quote the Boston IVF AI and say that we work accordingly? That's not going to be true. So we will have to put everything in our Excel sheets, even the images of the embryos, everything, so that over a period of 2-3 years, we develop our own AI bot, which will tell you the blastulation rate in a given case, what you have. That's going to be very important and relevant. And if you're doing, let's say, less cases, some clinic could be doing less cases, then I think 5-6 clinics should come together. They could be commercially different, but they can have the same ethos of the laboratory standards, same medias, similar protocols, etc. And then still they can develop their own AI bot by themselves. And that could be more relevant and more significant to the client in front of you.
Yes, sir. This is going to be a very important parameter for us to counsel patients,
Yeah.
because as you said, they come with previous failed cycles or previous expectations of 70-80%, even in a donor program. So we don't counsel even donor
Yeah.
program success rate of 70 or 80%.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think showing realistic pictures with our own lab KPIs
It's very important, very important.
is very important. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharayu and sir, for
It's a great
joining us
pleasure. Thank you
today.
so much
It is
for
such
giving
an
the
important
opportunity.
topic, and really, I learned a lot, and so are all the delegates who have joined us today. It was a great pleasure having you, and I know you're extremely passionate about academics, and you always say yes to academics. Thank you so much, Sharayu. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the
Thank you so
opportunity.
much,
Thank
Sachin
you.
sir, for joining us and giving your
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
the delegates for being available today. We will see you again in the next masterclass. Thank you so much. Bye, Sharayu. Thank you so much.